While today is only our 9th hearing in this select committee, which I note opened with much fanfare from my colleagues on the right, it's the 6th hearing, like a Groundhog Day, for the same supposed weaponization of social media through the curious case of the so-called Twitter files, Facebook files, social media files, however we want to couch it. The idea that the FBI and the Biden administration have stopped social media companies from free speech. At first I thought, when I heard this at the beginning, it's just my poor colleagues doing the bidding of Elon Musk, who's no fan of American democracy or the great diversity of this country. Is that what's going on here? What's really up their sleeve? It eventually came to light, though, that this is about the continual projection that the Republicans engage in themselves. This is about them intimidating social media companies to stop engaging in reviewing and moderating content before the 2024 election. And it's working. Media, and particularly social media executives and professionals, have been targeted, harassed, intimidated by this committee and the many hordes that follow behind them on Twitter and other places, and they're afraid to do their job. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to do their work on those very same platforms. That's well done. Well done. And guess what? You know how we did this? We did this by spending $20 million. Yes, that's how much this committee has spent to have 9 hearings, 6 of which are repeat hearings. $20 million. My fiscally conservative, budget-conscious, don't grow the government coffers friends have spent $20 million to have 9 hearings, 6 of which are about the very same subject. Now, what's even more interesting is I love when people give you half a sentence and then don't respond with what the answer is. And they've been doing this repeatedly, and you're gonna hear this throughout this hearing. For example, that first, what was up on the board there, can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? That looks like a question that he's asking his executives, Mark Zuckerberg. What about the answer? The answer was, I don't think that they put specific pressure on that theory. That's the answer. So the answer was no. But he doesn't want to show you that part because that doesn't help the argument that he's making. The other one that he did, where he says, that's a question. Luke, were you asking if there were threats like if you don't do what we want, a content moderation, we're going to sick Lena Khan on you or we're going to go after? And Nick, maybe you could answer just the subsequent question. The answer is, we were never sort of threatened with any. That's the answer. And you're gonna hear this repeatedly. That's the answer. They weren't threatened. They were informed, they were asked, they were questioned, things were pointed out to them, but the social media content people did what they wanted to do. That's how a private enterprise works. What's gonna happen now is, I'm gonna give you a preview of what's gonna happen in this hearing, because I've been sitting in this chair for a while, and I think I kind of know the Groundhog Day and how it goes. Up at the top row, we're going to get a poster with a tweet supposedly demonstrating how a member got labeled by social media company as sharing potentially misinformation on COVID. That's gonna happen. Then somewhere else down the line, we're going to hear about censorship in another country like Canada and how we as Americans need to be afraid of that happening here and how we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that's why we're having this hearing. Then wait for it, because you know it's coming. We're gonna hear about Hunter's laptop. because you got to hear about the laptop. You don't have a hearing unless you hear about Hunter's laptop. And you're going to hear the story about how it was squashed by the FBI and Trump would have won if that had been able to get out in more social media outlets. You're going to hear that one. And then finally, the final campfire story that you're going to hear lower down there is about how scary the FBI is. Because now they're going after people that look like them. You're going to hear that. That's going to be part of this hearing. So everybody can go, because I've just outlined for you what we're going to do. Or you can watch the tapes of the 6 other hearings we've done, sometimes with the same witnesses. Thankfully, goodness, we've got some new witnesses here. We did bring back one, because it's the same subject. But I do want to thank the witnesses today, all of whom are appearing in front of this select committee voluntarily. So I'd also like to share with you all why we're hearing these witnesses, this twist on the social media spin that's important right now. Why this is so prescient, having this hearing with these witnesses. Republicans are holding this hearing today in a last-ditch effort to influence the Supreme Court opinion in the case of Murphy v. Missouri. That's what's going on right now. During oral arguments in March, 6 justices questioned Republicans' claim that the federal government interactions with social media companies are tantamount to censorship. The Supreme Court is presently working in their chambers, preparing and thinking and contemplating what that decision is going to be. So when the chairman sent a letter to several of the witnesses asking that they testify today, the initial response was, shouldn't we wait until this court's decision? Wouldn't it be bad form to hold this hearing now and use the US Congress to unduly influence the decision? That's exactly what we want to do, is the answer. That's exactly why we're holding this hearing now, because we do want to influence the decision. We do want to use Congress for that. There's no doubt that this is completely inappropriate use of congressional oversight powers, that my colleagues are the biggest projectors ever. You know, they're like the bad boyfriend who tells you that you're the bad person when they're the ones doing the same thing that they're accusing you of. Let's take a step back and remember where we were during this time in 2021 and how, when we think about all of that, think about the projecting they're doing of using this Congress, this body, to weaponize the federal government. This Congress is actually weaponizing against social media companies. So in 2021, President Biden had just assumed office in the wake of a coup attempt that many on the other side still refuse to identify as such. More than 3,000 Americans were dying a day of COVID. 3,000 a day. That's what was happening while all of this is going on that they're discussing. Doctors, nurses, public health authorities were working to roll out a vaccine that the former president, Donald Trump, his administration initiated. Did we forget that part? We forgot warp speed. Remember that? They wanted the vaccine until they weren't in office, and then you don't want them at vaccine because it's not your president who's the one who's rolling it out. That was done to stem the tide of deaths in the face of mounting waves of conspiracy theories claiming without evidence that the vaccine was not safe. This is, while I'll repeat it, 3,000 Americans a day were dying from the direct effects of COVID. These conspiracy theories were downright dangerous. The conspiracy theories I'm referring to weren't just, now, you know, and I love her music, Nicki Minaj sharing a story that a friend of her cousin from Trinidad, something bad happened to him in his private parts after he took the vaccine. Remember that one? That the Republican majority has even used our select committee to give a platform to continue Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claim that COVID was supposedly bioengineered in a lab to target Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. These false claims that target Black people specifically, let me say, playing on the echoes of very real historic medical experimentation on Black people in America that were tantamount to genocide. For those unfamiliar, I'm referring to a moment the Tuskegee studies that the federal government ran from 1932 to 1972 in Alabama, or the centuries of experimentation on Black women because it's believed that we have a higher pain tolerance to be able to endure such experimentation. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claims directly echoed those centuries past that as well scapegoated Jewish people and held entire communities collectively responsible for illnesses like the Black Plague, often as a precursor for massacres and pogroms. It should be no surprise, it shouldn't surprise anyone that Mr. Slavitt, Mr. Flaherty, and others in the Biden administration were concerned about these types of flagrant misinformation. They were trying to stop a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic that had already claimed far too many lives. So yes, Mr. Slavitt and Mr. Flaherty talked to technology companies about what they were doing to stop misinformation. This isn't a violation of the First Amendment to do that. It's an example of the Biden administration doing the work that a president has been elected to do, to keep Americans safe, to check on how companies are using their platforms to inform Americans. Unless the majority forget, the government is entitled to speak for itself. It's entitled to inform, persuade, and yes, even to criticize private speakers. If you want to have First Amendment, have it for everybody. Don't just have it for who you want. Just as Justice Kavanaugh noted during the recent oral arguments, and his quote is, "My experience is in the United States in all its manifestations has regularly communications with media to talk about things they don't like or don't want to see or complaining about factual inaccuracies," end of quote. In fact, Mr. Jordan's own staff regularly communicates with the press. He and I communicated with the press about the content of articles, and you know what? We're entitled to do that. The chairman and the majority claim that Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt somehow, quote, coerced social media and technology companies into removing content. But this committee, Republican staff, have gathered hundreds of hours of testimony showing that that is simply not the case. Over and over again in those testimonies, you'll see social media company executives told the committee that no matter who identified concerning content, whether it's a member of the general public, members of Congress, the White House employees, the companies evaluated the content against their own internal policies, only took action if the content violated those policies. And over again, social media company executives told the committee in no uncertain terms that no government official ever coerced them into taking action, no government official ever threatened them with any adverse consequences if their companies did not take action, and no government official ever promised them any benefits if they did take action. The committee has heard hours of testimony to that effect, but the majority has consistently rebuked our side, the minority's request that the testimonies be made public. The majority, who has controlled the tapes, likewise declined to provide us with copies of hundreds of hours of video taken during those investigations. That's because they know the evidence shows that their big investigation, their $20 million investigation, is a flop. Just like their impeachment investigation was a flop. Has anyone forgotten that the investigation hinged entirely on a 1023 form that was later determined to be completely fabricated? That's right, the key witness turned out to be passing along what may well have been Russian disinformation. And apparently that's the name of the game now. The extreme MAGA majority has spent its time, not to mention tons of taxpayer dollars, on baseless investigations that have gone nowhere. All of it in an effort to bully tech and media companies into turning a blind eye to right-wing extremist conspiracies. that's spread across their platforms, even when those theories violate very basic terms of service about deliberate disinformation and promoting violence. They haven't uncovered any quote-unquote weaponization in the federal government. If anything, it's the committee that has been weaponized for a 2024 election. It's no accident, as I said, that we're holding this hearing today as a Supreme Court opinion in Murphy versus Missouri, a case brought on by Republican State's Attorney General, vociferously supported by committee Republicans, so much so that they even have an amicus brief on it. We're having this hearing now. So I say, let's tell the whole truth. The hours of witness testimony showing that there is no there to Republican claims.